Hello, this is the Generals and Warfare poem from 1880 to 1945. So it's a poem about various generals and the wars that they fought in from the Zulu War until the end of World War II. When the British marched into Zululand, a rapid victory there was planned. The savages would be put to the sword, if only command wasn't assumed by a lord. At Isandlwana, Lord Chelmsford would pay. His men were killed by Zulu Assagay. The Redcoats' recovery from morale was a lift by gallantly holding the base at Rorke's Drift. From behind mealie bags, the Welshmen defended. Attacking troops dug in was not recommended. The Zulus defeated the empire grown bigger, but good generalship as a cause does not figure. The generals were slow to master what happens when your guns fire faster. With the British once more on the veldt, a harsh lesson from the Boers was felt. Khaki dress instead of red did not improve how they were led. Another British army toff, at Boer commandos he did scoff. General Buller led his men just so to bloody Spion-Kop and Colenso. His replacements were so dissimilar, Lord Roberts alongside with Lord Kitchener. They marshalled great forces and beat back the Boers, taking the cities with fast-moving corps. The enemy responded with guerrilla war. They needed a new plan to subdue the Boer. Blockhouses and barbed wire bore movement to cramp, establishing the infamous concentration camp. With Great War approaching, new war plans were seen, like Schlieffen for Germans and Plan 17. The cult of the offensive called for French attack. Machine guns and shell fire would soon drive them back. Huge losses at the frontier, a German advance. Von Moltke the Younger's men tore into France. But Belgium fought bravely and Britain joined in. German success seemed increasingly slim. Mons and Lecato did Moltke's plan harm. The Germans defeated at the Battle of the Marne. Back to the Aisne the Germans did trek. Falkenhayn replaced von Moltke, the wreck. Out in the east, 'twas a different story, with Hindenburg's Germans achieving the glory. Tannenberg witnessed a great Russian defeat. Smashing two armies, the Tsar's men were beat. Their generals' radio chat intercepted. Samsonov's need for suicide was accepted. Western front trenches for hundreds of miles gave generals strategic and tactical trials. At Loos, General French sent British boys on, but shell shortages meant their chances were gone. The Germans used gas at Ypres to break through, but poor planning from generals, their chances they blew. Falkenhayn attempted at Verdun his attrition. Strategically hopeful, he lacked a tactician to stop his men falling to French shot and shell. As many Germans as Frenchmen there fell. Verdun survived, helped by General Pétain. Haig's some attack German forces did drain. But the Somme was a horror for Kitchener's army. The plan of attack on the first day was balmy. For a week they had pounded the German front line, and under the strong points they placed a huge mine. But attacking was slowed by the weight of their packs. Machine guns and rifles broke up their attacks. Haig bears much blame for this waste of his forces, a general who looked for a way to use horses. The big push, a breakthrough, his soldiers were told. Rawlinson, realistic, began bite and hold. His army untested, they had been civilian, involved in a battle with casualties a million. In 17 the general situation was worse. Nivelle's offensive put the French in reverse. Losses so heavy that the French went on strike, with British troops through Ypres mud had to hike. But Plumer achieved a success at Messines, when the mines planted under went off like a dream. Again Haig's great breakthrough did not come to pass. Continuous rainfall made his planning a farce. Men drowned in the mud of that low Flanders plain, with families on both sides feeling the pain of losses by shrapnel and bullet and gas. The German wire British troops just could not pass. But in the east, Russia was losing the war. The Bolsheviks' capitalist war did a bore. They signed a peace treaty and gave up much land. With troops from the east, a new offensive was planned to cut through the British and finish the fight before American forces could bring in their might. The German offensive of 1918 was one of the more successful we've seen. Ludendorff planned the German last throw of the dice. Specialist storm troops through the British would slice. 30+ miles of advances were spoken, but British Army lines just could not be broken. The threat to the lines the Allies did block by appointing a supreme commander called Foch. Finally learning that Allied success needs coordination, the Germans to press. With Britons and Frenchmen and doughboys in tow, against demoralised Germans, they would strike their blow. The Americans rushed in as new to the trench, adding their guts to the Great War's great stench. But Britain had learned from its 4 years of despair. Planes, tanks and troops combined for warfare. At Amiens, Haig's men went into the fray. Ludendorff claimed it as his blackest day. The Great War was over, the war to end wars, but vengeful Peace Versailles was vengeance to cause. Few generals had showered themselves with much glory. Mud, blood and metal left everything gory. The generals' knowledge of warfare grew slow, too far removed in their fine French chateau. When World War II broke out in late '39, the Japs and the Chinese had fought for some time. Japan also tested, could they rush a shove, until at Kholkhin Gol they ran into Zhukov. But back home in Europe it was Germany's fight, to prove Hitler's message that might is what's right. Poland defeated, cut up in two. Good generalship lessons to learn there were few. The Germans were stronger on land and in air. That blaming the leadership seems quite unfair. But Britain and France, a complete different story. Beating them quickly was a fast road to glory. The Allies were stronger in men and in tanks. Guderian and Manstein earned their Führer's thanks for working out blitzkrieg, a massed armoured host, to punch through the Ardennes and head for the coast. From Dunkirk the British back home would retreat, leaving shell-shocked French generals resigned to defeat. But defeating the French did not end the war. German chances of crossing the Channel were poor. The Royal Navy offered a terrible threat. The invading Germans could end up quite wet. Destroying the Air Force was Goering's job, but Dowding instead showed him up as a slob. In North Africa, Wavell gave Mussolini a fright. Swift strike through the desert put Italians to flight. Fascist ambitions in the Med he could cease, if Churchill had not sent his soldiers to Greece. In Greece the Brits' presence just brought in the Hun, then Greece, Yugoslavia and Crete were undone. In North Africa, Greece bought Axis the time for Rommel, the German commander, to prime his corps fresh panzers to launch an attack. From Libya to Egypt, the Brits were pushed back. Churchill blamed Wavell, relieved of command, aggression from Auchinleck, Winston's demand. Back over in Poland, a worse war was started when Hitler and Stalin's agreement was parted. The Nazis sought Lebensraum out in the east, where dark armies fought the Soviet beast. German advances, Red armies did splinter, but poor logistics meant no Moscow for the winter. Zhukov again then returned to the fray, thrown back from Moscow to Hitler's dismay. German troops losing, Red Army hopes grow, as Wehrmacht troops froze in the Soviet snow. Yet even then Hitler would take no step back, making war on the US after Japan's attack. Yet spring '42 against Allied hopes flew, the initial success of the Germans op blue. German advances made Stalin's blood boil into the Caucasus after the oil, until Hitler's strategy made Joseph glad when Hitler turned Paulus against Stalingrad. Huge losses again the Red Army had lost, losing Crimea and the Don at great cost. But manpower was never a major concern for Red Army generals with honours to earn. So into the battle the Strafbats were fed, to earn a reprieve through wounds or lie dead. In Stalingrad streets the blitzkrieg was killed, house-to-house fighting with both sides unskilled. The Sixth Army aiming to sweep Volga's banks, but unable to effectively make use of tanks. Choikov gave enough men the city to hold, until Zhukov's counterattack was unrolled. Back there in Egypt, the war had resumed, where Auchinleck's counterattack was quite doomed. by weak British tanks with a gun far too small, which German Mark III's could easily maul. Back to El Alamein the British were packed, then Churchill went over, and old Rorke was sacked. Rorke's crime was delay in attacking his foe, until he had forces quite ready to go. Monty came in and delayed even more, yet his public relations built up esprit de corps. Rommel attempted to end his campaign. Montgomery battered through at El Alamein. American aid helped him greatly, of course. Lend-Lease was flowing, with new tanks in force. The increasing armies of that mighty nation came crashing ashore in the Torch operation. Their initial assaults ended in a bloodbath against Rommel's hard veterans at Kasserine Pass. At Stalingrad, Hitler's weak allies were snapped. Zhukov's Red Army had von Paulus trapped. Hitler refused to let them retreat. The Sixth Army, frozen and starving, were beat. The Germans lost hundreds of thousands of men. Only 5,000 prisoners would see home again. Allied success in Tunisia followed. 300,000 Axis troops swallowed. Sicily next up, where tricks tipped the scales, with MI5 dumping a dead tramp from Wales. The fake plans in Spain to the Germans did go, who on the wrong islands awaited the blow. Eisenhower led the combined Allied force, balancing rivalries amongst his workforce. Ike's importance was preventing splits between arrogant Yanks and imperious Brits. With Patton and Monty, he had his hands full, yet opposing egos, Ike together did pull. Just before Husky, the Kursk battle was fought. Hitler's last offensive in the east came to naught. Manstein's earlier Kharkov success gave hope that despite all their losses, the Germans could cope. New Panthers and Tigers would soon turn the tide. Kursk, German troops, tanks, and hopes all but died. The Red Army steamroller still pushing west, the German defenders doing their best. Allies in Italy, German allies no more. Big Three at Tehran, planning ending the war. Committed to landing on the beaches of France. In June 44, they would take their big chance. Ike still commanded when Overlord began. Airborne and landings in Normandy, the plan. The Allied air forces controlled in the air, with resistance and agents, Nazi comms to impair. German armour held Caen, but could not push back. Monty held the panzers, allowing Patton to attack. German forces destroyed in Falay's deadly pocket. Then off across France, the Allies shot like a rocket. After losing Paris, German defences did harden, when Ike backed Montgomery's op Market Garden. Elborn were dropped, the Rhine was their goal. Unexpected panzers meant the plan did unroll. The 1,000-year Reich was coming to an end. Children and old men, German soil to defend. An unstable Führer the generals did indulge, with his last-ditch attack at the Battle of the Bulge. Blitzkrieg through Belgium, the Allies would split. Airborne holding Bastogne forced the Germans to quit. Tough fighting still followed, especially Berlin, as Zhukov's first front pushed in for the win. In the west there were pockets of Nazi resistance, but thousands of Wehrmacht preferred their existence. Hitler dead, Dönitz agreed unconditional surrender. Then across most of Europe, people went on a bender. Details in Asia have been left very thin, yet you can't write of generals and leave out Bill Slim. From defeat into victory was the story in Burma, but about 14th Army there was barely a murmur. Slim's leadership, training and preventing disease made his army most effective against Japanese. Getting his soldiers used to the jungle, removing commanders if they made a bungle, working out tactics with strategy sound, Japanese generals and hopes to confound. A polyglot army with mixed diet and belief, led on to glory by Uncle Bill, their chief. Once again, in the end, it was numbers that won. It's knowing how to use them that gets the job done. Often the generals planned for the last war. Defeat and experience bring change to the fore. Promoting the gifted over politics and wealth helps armies win wars and protects their health. Just a quick note, apologies that Brit has been used by me repeatedly to cover the forces of Britain along with the Empire and the Commonwealth troops who in their millions fought alongside the British. I did this for poetic reasons. Without the sacrifice of all those other people and their efforts, the tide of war would have been very different. Thank you.